It was late, maybe close to 9, and I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot, engine off, radio quiet, just watching people walk in and out with those brown paper bags that always look heavier than you expect. Nobody looked rushed. Nobody looked lost. Everyone just moved. And I remember thinking how strange it is that standing still feels more uncomfortable than going somewhere you don't really need to be. I didn't always notice it, but for a long time, motion itself felt like safety. Buying something, upgrading something, saying yes to something. It all felt better than pausing. Pausing made me feel exposed, like someone might notice I hadn't moved in a while. So I kept pace. Not fast, just enough to stay invisible. At the time, I told myself it was normal. Everyone does this. Everyone keeps going. But sitting there in that parking lot, I realized how many of my money decisions weren't about wanting more. They were about not wanting to look like I'd stop. And I don't think I knew how tired that made me until I finally did stop just for a minute and felt it catch up. Keeping up never felt dramatic. It wasn't big splurges or reckless stuff. It was small, quiet agreements. Group dinners where the check got split evenly, even though I ordered the cheapest thing. Drinks I didn't really want but didn't feel like explaining. Someone saying, "We'll just Venmo it later," and me nodding like it didn't matter. I framed it as being easygoing, low maintenance, the guy who doesn't make things awkward. And honestly, there was relief in that. No questions, no side glances, no moment where I had to admit I was doing math in my head. Blending in felt smoother than pausing the flow to say, actually, but there was a cost to that smoothness. I didn't see it day to day because $10 or $20 disappears easily. But over a month, it stacks. Over a year, it leaves a mark. And the uncomfortable part wasn't the money itself. It was realizing I was paying for silence, paying to avoid standing out, paying so no one would notice where my limits actually were. This is the part I didn't want to look at first, because once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee how often my spending had less to do with food or drinks and more to do with fear of being the odd one out. Subscriptions were never the problem, at least that's what I told myself. $10 here, 15 there. Music, shows, delivery perks. Nothing that would raise an eyebrow. They felt like background noise. Just part of being a normal adult with a phone and a job and a life that needed to keep moving. What I didn't notice was how personal canceling them felt. Not inconvenient, personal, like I was quietly admitting something about myself. That I wasn't using it enough. That I maybe couldn't justify it. That I was stepping slightly out of line with everyone else. So I didn't cancel. I let them sit, month after month. One night I finally looked at the list. 7 subscriptions. About $90 a month. That's over $1,000 a year. And nothing dramatic came with that realization. Just this low, dull weight in my chest. Not panic. Just the sense that I'd been paying to feel current. Paying to stay blended in. And once I saw it that way, the number didn't feel small anymore. It felt tired. Work lunches were another one. Nobody ever said you had to go out, but everyone went out. Same places. Same orders. $12 for something I could have made at home for $3. Maybe less. And I didn't even think about it most days. It was just what we did. Bringing lunch felt like a statement I wasn't ready to make. Like I was opting out of something bigger than food. So I kept going 5 days a week. Let's say $12 a day, that's $60 a week. About $300 a month. Over $3,000 a year. I remember doing that math once and immediately minimizing it. It's not that bad. People spend more than that. But the number stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because I couldn't afford lunch, but because I realized how automatically I'd agreed to it. Standing still with a packed lunch felt louder than quietly spending money I didn't feel. Until I finally did. Car stuff always felt responsible. New tires before they were totally worn. Interior cleaning more often than necessary. Upgrades that weren't urgent but felt smart. Like I was taking care of things. Like I had my life together. But when I look back, a lot of it wasn't about safety or maintenance. It was about reassurance. I wanted my car to say I was fine, that I wasn't struggling, that I was keeping pace. And none of it was cheap. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, easy to justify when it's spread out. The strange part is I never felt more stable afterward. Just temporarily relieved, like I'd passed some invisible check. And then a few months later, I'd feel that same low-level pressure again. That quiet urge to do something, anything, so I wouldn't feel like I was falling behind while standing still. Clothes were subtle. I wasn't chasing trends. I just didn't want to look outdated. A new jacket, new shoes, replacing things that still worked but didn't feel current anymore. It never felt like indulgence. It felt like maintenance. I told myself it was practical, work appropriate, normal, and it was, individually. But over time it added up. 100 here, 200 there. Not enough to stop and think about, but enough to quietly drain. What surprised me was how little satisfaction came with it. I'd wear something new a few times, feel fine, and then it would just become part of the background. The discomfort only showed up much later, when I realized how much effort I'd put into not changing anything at all. Just staying visually aligned, staying unremarkable. Phones were easier to justify. Technology changes, batteries degrade, cameras get better. I wasn't upgrading every year, just every couple. That felt reasonable, responsible even. But my old phone still worked, and I knew it. The real discomfort wasn't performance, it was perception. Holding on to something that looked dated made me feel like I was lagging, like someone might notice, so I upgraded. $800 spread out over payments so it didn't sting. 30-something a month, easy to ignore, until I added it to everything else I was already ignoring. And suddenly it wasn't about the phone anymore. It was about how often I paid to avoid that tiny feeling of being behind. That quiet, unnecessary fear. Delivery started as convenience. Long day, no energy. One tap and food shows up. Harmless. But convenience has a way of becoming default. $5 in fees, another $5 in tip. Suddenly a $12 meal is $25. Do that a few times a week and you're looking at $200 a month. Over $2,000 a year, just to avoid stopping on the way home. I remember the first time I really added it up. There was this brief pause, that same uneasy feeling, not guilt, just awareness, like realizing how often I paid to avoid even small amounts of friction, how standing still long enough to cook felt harder than spending money I didn't feel leaving. My credit card balance never looked scary. It hovered, always manageable. Minimum payments were low enough that I didn't feel pressure. I told myself I was in control. But interest is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there accumulating. A few $100s a year, then a few more. Over time, thousands spent on nothing I could point to. When I finally looked at how much interest I'd paid over several years, it felt uncomfortable in a very specific way. Not dramatic, just disappointing. Like realizing how long I'd been moving without actually getting anywhere. How staying in motion had kept me from noticing I was standing in the same place financially. Vacations were always justified. Everyone needs a break. Mental health, memories. And I believe that. I still do. But I also know how often I put them on a card without really thinking through the aftermath. $1,000 here, $2,000 there. Paid off slowly, long after the photo stopped meaning anything. The relief was real, but so was the wait afterward. What bothered me wasn't the travel. It was how quickly I accepted future stress as the price of present relief. Standing still and saying maybe later felt irresponsible. Going, even if it cost more than I wanted to admit, felt like progress. Splitting costs evenly always felt fair, simple, no math, no awkwardness. Except incomes were rarely even. There were times I paid $30 or $40 extra without saying a word. Times I swallowed that quiet frustration because speaking up felt worse. Over a year, that adds up. Hundreds, maybe more. I didn't notice the money as much as the pattern. How often I paid extra just to keep things smooth. Just to stay blended in. And how rarely I gave myself permission to pause and ask if it actually made sense for me. Small upgrades were the easiest to ignore. Premium seats, extra storage, faster shipping, extended warranties. Always just a few dollars more. Individually, they felt harmless. Together, they formed this steady leak. 50 here, 100 there. Enough to matter, not enough to stop. I remember finally adding a few of them up and feeling that familiar discomfort again. Not shock, just this quiet realization that I'd been saying yes automatically. That standing still long enough to say no felt more uncomfortable than spending money I wouldn't miss until later. Gym memberships were optimistic. So were wellness apps. Classes I swore I'd use more. Paying made me feel like I was trying. But effort and intention aren't the same thing. And month after month, the charges stayed, while the habits didn't. $40 here, $60 there. Over a year, close to $1,000 on good intentions. Canceling felt like admitting something about myself I didn't want to say out loud, so I didn't. I stayed blended in with the version of myself I wanted to be, even as the cost quietly piled up. Gas station stops were automatic. Coffee, snacks, drinks I didn't need but always bought. $5, $8, $10. Do that a few times a week and you're looking at over $1,000 a year. Just on moments. Just on filling space. It wasn't the spending that surprised me. It was how often those purchases showed up when I was tired or bored or avoiding silence. Little transactions that filled gaps I didn't know how to sit with. Celebrations were another quiet drain. Birthdays, weddings, events, gifts, travel. Participation felt mandatory. I rarely questioned the cost because questioning it felt selfish. So I paid. Sometimes literally with a card. Sometimes with stress later. There's something heavy about realizing how often I borrowed from future calm to afford present belonging. How standing still and opting out felt riskier than quietly absorbing the cost. Raises were supposed to change things, but they didn't. The extra money disappeared into slightly better versions of the same life. Higher rent, better groceries, more convenience, nothing dramatic. And somehow I still felt the same. That realization hit harder than I expected because it meant forward motion didn't guarantee relief. It just meant higher stakes. More expensive habits, more to maintain to keep blending in. Treating myself started as kindness, long day, rough week, small reward. But over time, reward became routine. Stress turned directly into spending. $30 here, $50 there, always justified. I don't blame that version of me. He was tired. He wanted relief. But looking back, I can see how often I confused comfort with progress. How often money stepped in where rest or honesty probably should have. I avoided looking closely for a long time. Avoided conversations. Avoided numbers. Silence became its own strategy. And money leaked in that silence, not dramatically, just steadily. Because staying busy felt safer than standing still long enough to notice what was happening. Once I finally slowed down, the discomfort wasn't in the math. It was in realizing how long I'd avoided it. What ties all of this together isn't recklessness. It's motion. Spending kept me moving, kept me from feeling stuck. But that sense of safety had a price, and it was higher than I ever meant it to be. Not because I was careless, but because blending in felt easier than pausing. Seeing that clearly didn't fix anything overnight. It just changed how heavy the pattern felt. I think about it sometimes when I'm standing in line somewhere ordinary, watching people tap their phones, swipe their cards, move forward without thinking. Blending in costs money. Standing still costs something else. I'm still not sure which one is harder. Some days I notice the pause now. Other days I don't. And maybe that's just where I am with it. Not solved, just aware. Letting that thought sit there a little longer than I used to.